You know, I've held on to this one quote from Carl Jung for years, and it's like a compass for my soul. He said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." For the longest time, I didn't quite get the depth of that. I thought love was something you found, something you earned, something you proved you were worthy of. I spent years of my life being a mirror for other people. Do you know what I mean? I became this perfectly polished, steady surface for them. They could look at me and see their own goodness, their own potential, their own unhealed wounds reflected back at them in a way that felt safe. I held that mirror up with all my strength, pouring my light, my energy, my very essence into keeping it still for them. And honestly, I thought that was love. But here's the thing that absolutely shook me to my core. The moment I got too tired, the day my arms ached so much that I had to put the mirror down and walk away, a really strange thing happened. They suddenly missed me, but it was this hollow, empty kind of missing. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The ache they felt wasn't for me, for the person who had been holding that heavy mirror for so long. Not at all. They missed the reflection. They missed the function I served. My absence shattered their comfortable reality, and for the first time, they were forced to look at the messy, unexamined parts of themselves they had been using me to avoid. If that feeling sends a shiver of recognition down your spine, if that vibration feels familiar, I want you to know you're not alone on this journey. Acknowledge this sacred moment of truth in the comments by simply writing, "I am returning home to myself," or even just 777, and let's affirm this path together. Have you ever made a decision that you knew, deep down in your bones, was for your own survival, and then stood in the silence, bracing for the peace you thought would follow, only to be hit by a hurricane of someone else's emotions? I have. And let me tell you, it's one of the most jarring and defining moments of a spiritual awakening, when you finally gather every last ounce of your divine courage to unplug your energy from a person, a job, or a situation that has been draining your very life force. You're doing so much more than just creating physical space. You are severing a deep, invisible, energetic cord. You're tearing up an unspoken contract that you never even knew you signed, a contract that the other person, in their own unawakened state, assumed was for life. That's why their reaction can feel so wildly out of proportion, right? It hits you with the force of a physical blow. You might have been prepared for a little sadness, maybe some confusion. But instead, what you get is this blast of icy coldness, or a sudden, white-hot anger that seems to come from nowhere. Sometimes, they even start telling a completely new story, a twisted narrative where you're suddenly the villain, the one who callously abandoned them in their darkest hour. It can make you question your own sanity. But why does this happen? You have to understand this, my friend, and I mean really, let it sink in. Their reaction has almost nothing to do with you, and everything to do with the gaping hole your absence has left in their own universe. You were the stabilizer in their personal chaos. You were their emotional sanctuary, the place they could come and dump all their fears, their insecurities, and their unresolved pain, and never, ever have to take an ounce of responsibility for it. You were the silent listener, the shoulder that was always there, the unwavering pillar that understood them even when they made zero effort to understand themselves, let alone you. So, when you walk away, the entire emotional house of cards they built around your constant presence comes crashing down. That whole structure was never stable to begin with. It was just propped up by your energy, your light. And in that deafening silence where your energy used to be, your decision to finally honor your own well-being becomes the loudest, most unbearable sound they've ever heard. It's a rejection, yes, but not of them. It's a rejection of the role. It forces them into a face-to-face confrontation, not with you, but with their own disowned parts, with the very shadow they have spent their entire lives running from. I want you to take a sacred pause right now. Just take a deep breath and ask your higher self this question. What role have you been playing in the lives of others that you never, ever auditioned for? Seriously, are you the eternal caretaker, the fixer of everyone's broken pieces? The emotional lifeguard who is always diving into the turbulent waters of someone else's drama, all while you're slowly, silently running out of air yourself. It brings me back to another piece of wisdom from Jung. He said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." This is the absolute key, the master lock to understanding the profound energetic shift that happens when you finally start to reclaim your own sovereignty. When you cease contact, when you stop answering that call or responding to that text, you're not just breaking a habit, you are shattering a projection. And this is a huge deal. Most people who are living in an unawakened state, they don't truly see you. They can't. They don't see the magnificent, complex, divine being that you are. Instead, they see what they need you to be. They project onto you the role of the perfect, nurturing parent they never had, or the unconditionally forgiving friend who will always be there, no matter what, or the dependable partner who will just absorb any amount of neglect and keep on giving. You become the solution to their deep-seated problems, the soothing balm for their oldest wounds, the constant that allows them to stay exactly where they are comfortable, but completely stagnant. But what's the real cost of playing that part? It's the slow, quiet, insidious disappearance of your authentic self. You become an emotional dumping ground, a landfill for other people's unresolved energy, and it leaves you feeling depleted, heavy, and burdened with emotions that were never even yours to begin with. For years, I truly believed this made me valuable. I thought my worth was directly tied to how useful I was to other people. What a painful illusion that was. I remember a friend of mine, let's call her Stacy. For her entire life, she was the 2 a.m. friend. You know the one. She was on speed dial for every crisis, every breakup, every emotional meltdown. She would drop everything: her sleep, her own needs, her peace of mind, to listen, to soothe, and to try and fix it. She honestly thought this made her a good friend, that it made her needed, that it made her loved. But the hard truth she eventually had to face was that she hadn't become a friend. She had become an emotional utility. Her friends weren't calling because they genuinely cared about her inner world. They were calling because they knew she was a safe, bottomless container that would absorb all their pain without ever asking for a single thing in return. So one day, Stacy, completely exhausted and on the verge of emotional bankruptcy, finally began to set a small boundary. She just stopped answering those late-night calls that left her feeling so hollowed out. And the reaction? It wasn't concern. It wasn't a friend asking, "Hey, is everything okay with you?" Not at all. It was anger, raw, unfiltered anger. They called her selfish. They accused her of changing, of becoming cold and distant. But the truth is, Stacy hadn't become cold. She had simply stopped being emotionally available for people who were fundamentally emotionally unavailable to her. Let me say that again. She had stopped setting herself on fire just to keep other people warm. In doing so, she held up that mirror, and for the first time, they couldn't stand to see the reflection of their own neediness, their own stubborn refusal to do their own inner work. They weren't angry because they had lost a friend. They were absolutely terrified because they had lost their emotional scapegoat. They were furious because now they had to sit with their own discomfort, a feeling they had successfully outsourced to her for years. And that, my friend, is the painful but incredibly liberating truth. Your worth is not, and has never been, defined by your ability to comfort the uncomfortable or manage the unmanageable emotions of others. That's the moment you start to realize how deeply your own identity has been tangled up in their comfort. And that realization, as painful as it is the first real step toward your own liberation. You may have stayed years longer than you should have. You may have bent yourself into so many shapes you forgot your own. You may have given until your well was bone dry. But the moment you finally whisper to the universe, "No more," you don't just create a boundary. You trigger their shadow, and in that moment, you are finally, divinely, given the chance to turn and face your own. The inner child that lives within them, that wounded part that felt abandoned so long ago, it starts to scream. It throws a tantrum, and it projects all of its ancient, unhealed wounds directly onto you. Their fragile ego, the one that depended so heavily on your unwavering emotional compliance, feels a seismic threat to its very existence. It's like an earthquake in their inner world. Their pain, which has been ignored and unacknowledged for a lifetime, screams so much louder than their awareness. And so, instead of being able to grieve the loss of a genuine connection, they lash out. They blame you. Instead of thanking you for the years of selfless support, they resent you. Not because you were cruel, but because you disrupted the comfortable illusion that kept them safe in their spiritual slumber. This is exactly what Jung meant when he talked about projection, that unconscious habit of seeing in others the very things we refuse to see in ourselves. When you withdraw your energy, you are no longer a blank canvas for them to paint their disowned parts onto. You are no longer the container for their unexpressed emotions. Suddenly, they are forced to stand alone in the stark reality of their own emptiness, their own profound need for healing, their own responsibility for their emotional world. And that's why your departure feels so absolutely cataclysmic to them. It was never about losing you. It was about losing the person who made it possible for them to avoid themselves for so long. Now, I want you to consider this with the deepest compassion for your own journey. What parts of yourself have you sacrificed to keep others comfortable? This is where the insight gets really deep, a truth that most people will never grasp. The shadow isn't just about them, it's about you, too. Because that role you played, the overgiving, the overextending, the constant, draining availability that wasn't authentic, wholehearted love, that was your own shadow material at play. It was the part of you that learned, probably when you were very young, that your worth was directly tied to your usefulness. It was the part of you that came to believe that love was something you had to earn through endless, exhausting giving. When you finally walk away, you aren't just triggering their shadow. You are finally, bravely, turning to face your own. And here's the truth that cuts right to the bone, the divine realization that will change everything for you. Your decision to walk away has almost nothing to do with them and absolutely everything to do with you. It is not an act of punishment. It's not a quest for revenge, and it's certainly not a desire to make them suffer. It's about something far more sacred and infinitely more necessary. It's about saving yourself. But you have to understand, this act, this sacred and silent act of self-rescue, forces other people to confront something they have buried deep down, something they have spent years, maybe even decades, successfully avoiding. The question that terrifies them, the one they refuse to ask, is this: who am I without the person who kept me emotionally regulated? Who am I when I can't call someone at 2 in the morning to fix my anxiety? Who am I when I'm finally forced to sit with my own pain instead of dumping it on someone else? For some, the answer to that is so unbearable that they might spiral into despair. They might lash out with a venomous anger and blame you for their pain. They might completely rewrite the entire history of your relationship to cast themselves as the perpetual victim and you as the heartless villain who abandoned them. But you were never trying to play God. You were never auditioning for the role of anyone's savior. You were just trying to be free. Free from the exhausting, soul-crushing role of being someone else's emotional lifeline. Free from the crushing weight of being responsible for another person's inner peace. It reminds me of a man I once knew. Let's call him John. For 37 years, John was the designated family peacemaker. When his parents fought, and they fought often, it was John who mediated. When his siblings feuded over old wounds and perceived slights, he was the one who smoothed things over. When holidays became so tense you could cut the air with a knife, thick with unspoken resentments and passive-aggressive comments, he was the one who kept everyone laughing, distracting them from the deep dysfunction nobody wanted to address. He never asked for that role. It was just thrust upon him as a kid. He was the sensitive one, the empathetic one, the one who could somehow handle the family's emotional chaos. And he carried that role into his adulthood like a heavy, invisible cross, truly believing that his family's stability depended entirely on his ability to absorb their conflicts. He was the glue, the problem solver. But what they didn't see, what they refused to see, was how that role was tearing him apart, piece by piece. They didn't see him leaving family gatherings feeling like a hollowed-out shell, emotionally drained. They didn't know he would lie awake at night, replaying every conversation, trying to figure out how to fix problems that were never his to solve. He had become what therapists call the identified patient, the one person in a dysfunctional system who carries all the emotional labor for everyone else. while his own needs are completely ignored. When John finally decided to step back, to stop being the mediator, to resign from his unpaid position as the family therapist, his family didn't celebrate his newfound boundary. They didn't say, "Good for you, John. You deserve your own life." They panicked. They called him selfish. They said he was abandoning them when they needed him most. Some of them stopped speaking to him altogether, as if his refusal to keep carrying their burdens was a deep, personal betrayal. But here's the thing. They weren't really angry because they lost a son or a brother. They were angry because they lost their emotional scapegoat. They lost the person who made it possible for them to avoid their own inner work, their own healing. When John stopped being their emotional sponge, they were forced to feel their own feelings, maybe for the first time in decades, and that terrified them. This reveals the most profound paradox of walking away, doesn't it? The very people who will label you as selfish for leaving are often the ones who have been incredibly selfish by staying in a dynamic that required your constant self-sacrifice. They needed you to keep sacrificing your mental health, your precious energy, and your own sacred needs so that they wouldn't have to face themselves. It's a hard pill to swallow, but they wanted you to stay small so they could feel big. They wanted you to remain broken so they could feel whole. They needed you to keep carrying their shadow so they could live in the comfortable illusion that they didn't even have one. And for the first time in your life, you chose your peace over their performance. You chose your sanity over their comfort. You chose your healing over their convenience. And that, my friend, is the sacred moment. The mask finally drops, not just theirs, but yours, too. Remember what Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to do that, you have to dismantle who you've been pretending to be. And that dismantling process is rarely celebrated by the people who benefited from your pretense. When you finally walk away, you're not just leaving a person or a situation. You are leaving behind a version of yourself that never truly existed. The version that said yes when your soul was screaming no. The version that gave from an empty well. The version that stayed when every fiber of your being wanted to run. You are leaving the false self that kept everyone else comfortable while it was slowly, quietly suffocating your true self. You're walking away from the role that made you indispensable to others, but completely invisible to yourself. That feeling you get, that pang in your chest that feels like guilt. I want to tell you, it's not really guilt, it's grief. It's the profound grief for the years you spent as someone else's emotional support system while completely neglecting your own. It's grief for all the parts of yourself you had to abandon, just to be accepted, to feel needed, to be loved, in the only broken way they knew how. It's grief for the dreams you put on hold, because their crisis always seemed more urgent. Grief for the boundaries you never set because their comfort always felt more important than your own well-being. Grief for all the truths you swallowed, the words you never spoke, because keeping the peace felt more valuable than your own voice. But underneath that heavy, aching grief, if you listen closely, there's a new feeling bubbling up. It's a quiet, radical relief. Can you feel it? It's the relief of finally choosing yourself. The relief of saying, this isn't working for me anymore. The relief of honoring that inner voice that has been whispering, then talking, then shouting at you for years, telling you, you deserve better. Take a deep breath right now and just feel that relief. That is the feeling of your soul welcoming you home. Jung's idea of individuation, the journey of becoming your authentic self, is the most important work we can do in this life. But it absolutely requires separation. It requires the courage to disappoint people who needed you to stay the same. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood, judged, and even vilified by those who preferred you unconscious and convenient. Your decision to walk away isn't cruel. It's conscious. It's not selfish. It's self-preserving. It's not an abandonment. It's a profound awakening. And that awakening is exactly what they can't tolerate, because your light reflects back to them their own darkness. Your freedom highlights their own self-imposed prison. Your choice to heal forces them to see how much healing they still have left to do. So, if you've walked away and the world around you has called you cold, cruel, or heartless, I want you to hear me now. You weren't abandoning anyone. You were returning to yourself. Your absence might have shaken their world, but it was the first time your presence began to truly nourish your own. Sometimes, our departure is the only mirror left for others to finally face themselves. Walking away might just be the greatest gift you could ever give them, the opportunity to discover who they are when they can't use you as an emotional crutch anymore. But more importantly, it is the greatest gift you will ever give yourself, the opportunity to discover who you are when you're no longer performing for anyone else's comfort. This whole journey isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming whole. It's about learning that true self-love isn't the absence of love for others. It's the very foundation that makes genuine, authentic love possible. When you love yourself enough to walk away from what diminishes you, you create the sacred space for what truly nourishes you. When you respect yourself enough to say no to what drains you, you preserve your precious energy for what fulfills you. And when you trust yourself enough to choose your own peace over their approval, you discover a kind of inner stability that no external relationship can ever provide or destroy. Jung's words echo again. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Those barriers aren't just walls to keep others out. They are the patterns you built to keep your true self hidden, the people-pleasing, the over-giving, the boundaryless existence you mistook for love. Walking away strips these barriers down. It forces you to confront the ultimate truth. You are worthy of love, not because of what you do, but simply because of who you are. You deserve relationships that add to your life, not subtract from it. You deserve to be chosen, not just needed. So leave when you must. Speak less when silence is sacred, and protect the peace you fought so hard to find. If any of this resonated deep within you, I invite you to do something powerful. In the comments below, I want you to write these words. I walked away to come home to myself. Let that be your declaration, your witness, your sacred commitment to this journey inward. Because this isn't just about walking away from them, it's about walking inward and finally remembering the magnificent person you were before the world told you to earn your worth by disappearing. You're not cruel, you're conscious. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not selfish, you are sovereign. And that, my friend, changes everything. Welcome home,